itself out. Okay. So tonight's topic continues on from where we've been discussing about the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, the portable temple in the desert while the Jews were traveling. But it's something which resonates well beyond the Mishkan. We're going to jump from a specific isolated debate in the Mishkan structure and extrapolate to life way beyond that. Hey, how are you? Welcome.
Hey guys.
Hey.
How's everything?
All right.
You made it. You finally made
I
it.
know. Tuesdays are like my worst night, but tonight is like a window, right?
You're
How
here.
you doing?
Good to see you.
Hey.
Got
Alright,
something
cool.
to eat, to drink. Make yourself comfortable.
All right, cool, man.
But just starting. Perfect timing.
Right, perfect actually. Yeah. So, all right, I'll sit here.
If you want a
Yeah.
yarmulke, right
Good.
back there.
I actually have a yarmulke.
Oh, you have one?
It's
Better.
right there. It
Oh,
is.
there you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Beautiful.
Okay, cool. How's everything going?
We're good. We're just diving into the discussion.
All right, let's do it.
So we're going to discuss tonight the tension between the visionary and the pragmatist. And there's different people and different personality traits. And then in each one of us, we have this tension as well. We have these hopes, aspirations, and we're big dreamers. And then we have to live practical life, implement these things, and go through the grind. And there's
Diapers have
constantly
to be,
diapers need to be changed, right? You have all these dreams, and then you end up being caught up in just paying bills and getting things off the ground. So we're going to look at how to reconcile or how this tension plays itself out, and an ideal way that we can navigate this tension. But we're going to start with the story in the parsha. So the Jews are building the Mishkan. They're building this portable temple in the desert. And Moshe receives the instructions from God as to how design should be, and it's very detailed. Exact measurements, materials, designs, how the infrastructure should be. And God tells him, I want to appoint a project manager to be in charge of this development, in charge of this construction. And God appoints a fellow by the name of Bezalel. And what's fascinating is, Bezalel was first of all Moshe's great nephew. So people originally had concerns. Moshe's nepotism, choosing his family. This guy isn't qualified. But the reason they perhaps had these concerns is that Bezalel was 13 years old. The Talmud says. Now, imagine for yourself, you have here a massive community. There are millions of Jews then living in the desert in this community. They're about to embark on this huge building campaign. And a building for God. Is going to be the center of the whole community. And who is in charge of the whole project? This 13-year-old little pisher, right? This bar mitzvah boy. This little kid. And if you think about it, it's even stranger. He could not have had any experience in design, in building. They were just weeks ago slaves, right? In Egypt. They were just laborers. So no one had any experience in any art, any construction, architecture. And yet this little kid was suddenly entrusted to be in charge of this massive development.
Were there bar mitzvahs back then?
Probably not like a mitzvah we have now, no.
Right.
I mean, we assume that the age of maturity, of manhood and responsibility was 13 back then, because the source of it is in Torah. And the fact that the way we know Bezalel was 13 years old, because it says that everyone who worked on the project was ish, a man. So we deduce that it's telling us that he was just a man, just 13. But they probably didn't have the bar mitzvah parties that we have today, discos or DJs.
And also people lived much less, right? Back then, like 40s.
In that time, biblical time, people lived longer. I mean, relative now, it's similar to now. Moses lived 120. People did live pretty long lives. But 13 was 13.
Yeah.
So people were very wary of this, but Moses said it came from God. And the verse tells us how Bezalel was divinely inspired with wisdom, with artistic insight, and he had what it took to be on top of this project. The story goes that Moses tells Bezalel what God had told him. He relays the design, and he's telling Bezalel, this is your job now to get this done. Here's the blueprints, make it happen. And Bezalel, this 13-year-old kid, argues with Moses. We don't have this clear in the text, but what we have in the text, and I wish I had source sheets today, but I don't. We have in the text said, Bezalel did everything that God told Moses. And the commentaries pick up, doesn't say Bezalel did everything Moses told him. It did everything that God told Moses. And Rashi, the famous commentary, says because Moses, the way Moses told to Bezalel differed. And he did what God originally told Moses. And here's the background. The way originally God conveyed to Moses the construction of the Mishkan was God said to build the structure, the walls, the whole structure, and then construct the furniture, the menorah, the altar, the mizbeach, the shulchan, the show table. All those, once you have the structure, then build the vessels, then build the furniture. When Moses tells Bezalel how to build it, he first tells him build the furniture, build the vessels, and then build the structure. And Bezalel, we find in Torah, first builds the structure and then the vessels. And the Midrash says there was a debate over here, a conversation. That when Moses told Bezalel how to build the Mishkan, Bezalel said, with all due respect, that's not how we do construction. Where are you going to put all this furniture in the meantime? Leave it on the street? You're going to make this beautiful, expensive, golden furniture, gold-plated, and what are you going to do? Leave it outside? First, let's build a home. First, build the structure, and then we'll fill it up with what needs to be filled inside. And Moses tells him, Bezalel, you're brilliant. You're absolutely right. And he says, in fact, your name, Bezalel, is really two words put together. Betzel, in the shadow of, El, God. So Moses told Bezalel, you must be in the shadow of God because you are able to intuit what God wants. And that's what God originally told me. You're right. And that's the story as we have it. Now I want to examine, and hopefully with your help, what's going on over here. There are so many strange things here. First of all, Moses changed what God had told him. Now, if we're to assume that Moses just changed things on a whim, that calls into question the whole Judaism, right? The premise of Torah is that we had the 5 books of Moses, the Word of God. If everything that Moses taught the Jews was filtered through, he thinks is better that way, then throw the whole Torah out. Nothing's sacred anymore. And Bezalel, because he thought differently, I can say that every single mitzvah, right? Imagine Moses teaches the Jews kosher, don't mix milk and meat. You go to Moses, you don't know how this works. Hamburger. What are you talking about, don't mix milk and meat? That's the basis Bezalel was telling him. Like, Moses was saying, this is the word of God. And Bezalel says, Moses, that's not practical, come on. So why here was it no problem with Bezalel having the audacity to argue with Moses? And then Moses says, you're absolutely right. What? This whole thing sounds cryptic. There's something deeper here, obviously. And there's so much written about this little debate, because in general, the structure of the Mishkan, the building of this edifice for God, is a metaphor for life. The Mishkan is a micro world. And building the Mishkan is symbolic of how we ought to be building the world, building our personal world, our lives, and the world at large. And so every detail of the Mishkan, and we discussed this a couple weeks ago, every detail of the Mishkan mirrors something in the world. And if we understand the structure and construction of the Mishkan, it'll help understand how to structure our own lives, how we can create a home for God in this world at large. And to this debate as well, which goes to the very overall construction of the Mishkan, speaks to the heart of life and how we're meant to be constructing our own Mishkan, building our own sacred space, building our own holy world. So here I want to present two different teachings on this little debate. There are many more, but here's two that I think are really beautiful.
Is this week's parsha?
Yeah, yeah.
And it also, the big, like the great art school in Israel is called
Bezalel. After this fellow, Bezalel.
Right,
yeah.
Considered the first artist or something.
He's the first Jewish artist, I guess. Yeah.
Right, I think so.
Right. He chose a good week to come, right?
I know. When you said we were reading it, I think you told me we were going to be talking about it. Like that's a topic I like. Well, I think about this all the time. This idea, actually.
It's about to get better.
Right.
We're diving right into it. So, two ideas. The first one is fairly simple. The second one more complicated. The first idea is this. Well, first of all, I'm going to throw it out to you. What do you make of it? Any ideas of to make of this debate between Moses and Bezalel? Why would it make sense to first build the vessels and the furniture, the specifics of the Mishkan, and then build the overall structure? Or why would it make sense to first build the Mishkan at large, the structure of the temple, and then fill it with its specific vessels?
But what did they end up doing? They ended up
building the overall structure.
Right.
But Bezalel, his vision, ended up overriding Moses.
It's almost like, it is weird. Like, did Moses just get it wrong?
Like a momentary lapse of memory, right?
Yeah, that's right, something like that. But you obviously that's probably not it.
If we support that, then we can throw away the entire Torah. I feel like
because everything could just been
everything could be Moses made mistakes, all along.
I mean, with cheese, meat with cheese. I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
Right. No one challenged it. They would have, if you would have challenged it, you're right.
You haven't challenged it, right?
Exactly. So here's one idea. There are two types of structures that we build, and the relationship between the furniture that goes inside them and the structure are very different. For example, there's a home and a factory. Both of them have the structure, a roof and the walls, and have furniture or machinery inside, right? But they're radically different. In a home, the most important part of your home is shelter. It's a space for you to be safe, to be secure, to be guarded from the elements, right? To be in your own space, comfortable. So having a roof over your head, that's the most important thing of a home. And then, to make it even more comfortable, couch, bed, table, chairs, and furniture. But the furniture is just to complement the house. The home itself, the structure itself, is what's important. It's where you feel at home. It's where you are you. In a workspace, or a factory even more so, the most important thing is the machinery, right? It's the productivity. Happens to be, you need to keep that in a building. It needs to be safe. It needs to be locked up. So you have a building around it. But what's the central idea? Really, it's what's inside there. It's the furniture. It's the things happening there. The specifics, whatever factory, whatever workplace it is, that's what's important. And to keep that, to support that, there has to be a structure around it. So really the difference between, is the purpose of this structure a place to be at home or a place to get something done? If it's to be a home, the specifics aren't so important. If you have that couch or a different couch or no couch, some people have no furniture in their home and it's still a home. But if it's a place of productivity, then you need those vessels of productivity, or else it's a worthless endeavor. If you have a factory without any machinery, there's no business going on. If you have an office without a computer, without a printer, you can't do work. It's a worthless building. No one needs it, right?
Yeah.
So Moses and Bezalel were having a debate. What is this Mishkan about? What's the point of building this structure to be the center of the Jewish community? Moses says the first thing you should build is the vessels. That's what's really important here. Each one of these vessels had a different way of serving God. That was a practical service and was symbolic of also a personal service to God. The altar, the Mizbeach, they sacrifice animals. And that's sacrificing ourselves, putting ourselves aside for God. The menorah gave forth light. Also symbolizes giving light to the world, opening ourselves up to God's light. So each one of these furniture pieces, each one of these vessels, were a channel of the Jews' relationship to God, and channel a different form of relationship to God. And Moses said that's what the temple's about. Finding avenues of connection, finding points of commitment to God. That's the Mishkan. And so to him, the vessels were the Mishkan. Oh yeah, they need to be housed somewhere, so we'll build structure. But what are we starting with? What's this all about? What's the endeavor to build these vessels? It was a factory. It was a spirituality factory. And so the machinery of spirituality was the mainstay of the Mishkan. Bezalel argued, no. We're building a home for God. We're building a place where God's presence is going to rest in our community. We're building a space, a sacred space. That's what the Mishkan is, a place where God can be amongst us, where we can go and experience God. Yeah, you're going to tell me, what are we going to do there? How are we going to experience God? A bunch of different things we can do. But the point of it wasn't necessarily, the main part of the Mishkan wasn't the specific services. It was just the overall experience. That overall experience had to also be translated to make it more palpable, to make it more meaningful. There had to be also these different things which we do in the temple. Like, to make my home more comfortable, I'm going to have a table and chairs, I'm going to have a couch. But essentially, they are like cherry on top of the icing of the home. And so this was a debate between Moses and Bezalel, which spills over into life as well. As individuals, we have this ongoing tension that we have general ideas and specific ideas, right? We have bigger picture and a smaller picture we're trying to achieve. And the question is, what's meant to be our focus? In Judaism, we have this as well. There's so many mitzvahs, so many specific points of connection to God, responsibilities, commitments. But then there's the idea that I'm trying to become a better person, trying to build a relationship with the divine. And so, where am I supposed to be putting the main focus? Am I meant to be doing mitzvahs in order to create a relationship with God? Or are they ends of themselves? So, this debate between Moses and Bezalel about the Mishkan was really about life in general. And Bezalel won the end of the day. Right? The Mishkan, and although I should tell you, this debate continued to rage on thousands of years later in the purpose of the temple, and there's a very famous debate between Maimonides and Nachmanides.
What's that?
Maimonides and Nachmanides about what the main focus of the temple was, function was, and it spills out into Jewish law. According for Nachmanides, the ark was the centerpiece of the Mishkan, of the temple. According to Maimonides, the altar was the centerpiece of the temple. And what their debate is, Maimonides says the service, that's what temple is about. Bringing sacrifice to God, worshiping God, service, doing specific services. That's what the Mishkan was, the temple was. According to Nachmanides, no. The arks where God's presence rested. That's the Mishkan is. It's a home for God. And so it makes it in many different areas of law regarding the structure of the Mishkan, the Mikdash. This argument plays itself out. What if the ark is missing? Does this Mikdash have holiness? Is it still a special place? According to Maimonides, we can go right now. If we were pure and going through the proper process, we can go to Temple Mount today and offer sacrifices, because it's a home where there's an altar. We don't need a structure. The structure is just something additional to give form, but essentially all you need is an altar on our Temple Mount.
Like a chuppah.
Throw in a chuppah, exactly,
Right.
and you have a sacrifice. You have the rituals.
Right.
According to Nachmanides, what do you mean? There's no ark here. God's presence isn't resting here. Of course, His presence is there, but we don't have that experience of a temple. So this debate never fully resolved itself, but this may have been a debate between Moses and Bezalel. Second idea.
It was almost like though it wasn't a debate. It was more like that sounds like that. He goes, oh, and like it wasn't really. It's like more about an idea comes out of it.
Right.
It's
Two viewpoints.
Right. And
Two
it's sort of like Bezalel is just reminding him, you didn't hear it right.
Yeah,
This is what he said. I intuited it.
Right,
And I'm going to let you know. So, right, you're right. It wasn't a debate. But the other thing is like, if there's no tank, to hold the fuel is just splat. You can't get to your next gig in life, right?
Yeah,
So,
the engine.
like he was saying, no, you build a structure because you have to house the vessels, or else it's just inchoate. It's just amorphous.
Oh, that brings me to the second explanation, which is linked to the first, but it takes a little deeper, right? And it's fascinating if you look at the characters, who they were. Who was Moses and who was Bezalel? Bezalel, we know his ancestry, his lineage, which uncharacteristically, Torah doesn't just tell us who his father was, tell us who his grandfather was as well, which is unusual. Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur. Hur, we know, was a famous character at that time. When the Jewish people, when Moses went up the mountain, he entrusted the Jews to two people, Aaron, his brother, and Hur, who was his nephew. When the Jews wanted to make the golden calf, Aaron supported them in the hope of stalling them, but he said, okay, bring me gold, and eventually he was involved in making the golden calf. Hur protested, and he was killed by the mob. So he put his life on the line.
About that.
He put his life on the line for God's sake. So how do you guys do this? Build a golden calf? Just heard the revelation of God. We just experienced the oneness of God. And now you're going to build a golden calf? And they weren't interested in hearing that at the time. And this riled up mob killed him. So he was a person who put himself in the line, an activist, a Jewish activist, to the fullest extent, even risking his life and eventually giving his life for this. Hur's mother was Miriam, Moshe's sister. Miriam, we also know, was an activist. When Pharaoh wanted to get rid of the Jews, his plan was all the Jewish boys that are born should be killed upon birth. And he called the midwives. Who were the midwives? Miriam and Yocheved. Miriam and her mother Yocheved. And he tells them, I want you to help me out here. I want you to. I'm commanding you, as the Pharaoh, every time you go to deliver a Jewish baby, if it's a boy, you kill it. And they ignored him. They said no. And they told him, these Jewish women, you don't know what they're made of. They give birth before you get there. But they essentially risked their lives for the sake of the Jewish community. So Bezalel came from a lineage of activists, of people that put their lives at risk to save others, to help others, to make a difference in the community. Moshe, on the other hand, he's called Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a teacher. Moshe was a theorist. He lived, I don't want to say in an ivory tower. He was a practical leader as well, right? But essentially, he was in the clouds. He went up the mountain and experienced God in the clouds. Moshe saw life from a very different perspective. He wasn't in the trenches with the Jews, right? He wasn't there in the slavery.
He was the visionary.
He was the visionary. He was the person who was communicating the divine wisdom to the world. So they were coming from very different places. They saw the world very differently. They saw their roles in the world very differently. And they saw the construction of the Mishkan differently as well. Moses knew what he heard from God. He heard the order from God. But the way he viewed it, from his perspective, was different. Meaning he understood God's words this way from his perspective. I'll explain what I mean. Whenever you have a project, whether it be a building project, it can be you're producing a piece of art, it can be you have to get something done, there's always the end result which you want, the vision that you have. This is what I'm working towards. And then there's a process to get there. For the visionary, in the vision stage, in the thought stage, in the planning stage, what's first? The end result. That's where I'm starting from. I see this. And then I work backwards. How can I achieve this? Right? What are the steps I need to take to get there? So what's first in my mind? First is the result. And then I have to figure out what I'm going to build around that. But when it comes to actualizing something, to putting that into practice, it's the opposite. First, you need to go through different steps, whatever needs to be done, lay the groundwork, lay the foundations, build it up, and then you'll have the end result. The end result only comes as a result of the preparatory steps that you did. We say in the L'chadodi every Friday night, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila. Means the end of the work, the result, is always in your mind first. Because your vision is the result, right? I want to achieve this. I want to have this image. I want to see this played out. But that only comes after you go through all the steps to get there. And here you have different perspective of Moshe and of Betzalel. For Moshe, all that mattered was the end result. He saw a perfected world, right? The way he saw people, he saw the beauty in everyone. He saw their potential. The way he saw the world was from the divine perspective. He saw everything pure, clear, radiant. He saw everything reflecting the divine. This is a world that God created. And so when he saw the Mishkan, he says, I see, what's my vision? The result, the vessels, that's like the specifics, the details, the way it's played out. That's what Moshe saw. That's the Mishkan that he saw. Betzalel was the pragmatist. He was the artist, the artisan. He was the builder, the architect. He came from a family that was putting themselves on the line for saving lives, the front line of the Jewish community. And so the way he saw the world was in how to get things done. We got to lay the groundwork first. We got to do the basics. They may not be glorified jobs. It may not be something which we're experiencing immediately, but eventually, if we put the right groundwork, we'll be able to have the results we want. Now, the reason these can be in conflict, even though they usually complement each other, right? You first the vision, then the actualization, is because in personality, people that are visionaries, they play that visionary mindset out even the way they actually try to actualize things. Right? If you have this brilliant creative guy, starts a company, a startup, and he has an amazing idea, it's usually going to bust unless he brings on someone who has good business insight someone who's very practical. Because the creative person who has the ideas doesn't know how to actualize the ideas. They're so stuck in their way of thinking that when it comes to actually, okay, now how do we actually do this? Oh, I got to set up a bank account. I got to actually go through this, and it doesn't. They don't know how to do those things. These are not part of my vision. I had this grand vision. I didn't have to get into all the silly things of paying your mortgage and of paying, that wasn't part of my plan. The flip side, the real pragmatist, the practical guy, the guy who does everything the right way, doesn't think out of the box, doesn't have a vision, doesn't know where he wants to end up. Right? I know how to do things, but you can never get to somewhere unless you know where you want to go. And so you need a partnership of these two people to get the end result. But often in life, we don't have that vision fully worked out. If you're going to wait till you have a perfect vision to actualize, you may be waiting your whole life. Right? So, what Bezalel was really telling Moshe is that you're telling me, let's have this vision, build the vision, and then build a structure around it. That works for a guy like you, Moshe. You have that fully developed vision. You see the world that way. You can work that way. But for the rest of us, we live in this cloudy world. We don't know exactly what we want. We're not able to visualize a beautiful end result. And in order for us to build this temple, to make a home for God, to build a sacred space around us, we have to just do the right things. We have to just take a few shots in the dark, trial and error, start doing stuff. And eventually we'll get there. We'll create something. They did this social experiment about 10 years ago, I think it was. And they had a very famous violinist. His name was Bell, Bell. And he was playing in the subway station in Washington, D.C. one morning. And they videoed it. I think the Washington Post did it. And people were just ignoring him, walking by as if nothing happened. No one was stopping. This was one of the greatest in the world. And their point was, we're so busy that no one even notices it. But what it brings out is, if you don't have the right packaging for something great, it's going to get ignored. It's going to lose its greatness. It's not going to be appreciated, right? If you have a beautiful piece of artwork and you don't have the right frame for it, it's not on the right wall or the right setting for it, it's going to get lost. It's going to get just swallowed up. But the question is, that's what Moshe said. Moshe said, first let's make the art. Let's create the product. Let's get the beauty. And then we'll figure out how to get there, how to make it shine, how to structure everything. But Bezalel told Moshe, though, we don't have that art. For the average person, we can't just produce that. We don't have that inner vision, that spirit that can just be laid out there so bare, so clear. And for us, we have to work the outside in. Let's first find the right frame.
And also protect it too, right?
Protect it as well, but not only protect it physically, protect it let's build infrastructure, let's build structure, and then we'll be able to figure out, okay, now I know how to fill that, right? Let me find the right frame for the setting that I have. Then I'll say, okay, now I know, how I can fill it with something that makes sense, and eventually I'll have a product that looks beautiful. So, Bezalel told Moshe, let's first build the Mishkan. First build the structure. And then we'll be able to fill it with something glorious. We'll be able to fill it with those points of light, with those vessels in the temple. And how that translates to us in life is that often we can feel lost. We don't have our visions clear, down pat. We don't know exactly where we're going, where we want to go. Religiously, we don't have this vision of, what it means to be in a deep relationship with God, what it means a redeemed world. We don't see it. We're not able to experience that. And it sort of seems like, okay, so then what's the point of all these things I'm going through, right? For some people, in life, you're a little lost. You say, what's the point of everything I'm doing? Why am I just going in one day to the next day and going through motions of so many things that I don't even know where direction I'm going? Religiously, the same thing. I don't experience that communion with God. I don't experience that spiritual elevation. I feel like, so why am I going through the processes of all these religious practices? Why should I do these mitzvahs and build this structure if it's not coming as a result of something? It's not. I don't have a vision that that's all leading towards. And Betzalel told Moshe, that's a human experience. Moshe couldn't appreciate this. When Moshe was told by God to build a Mishkan, he only could see it through his experience. A Mishkan, sure, I have this beautiful vision of the vessels, of how we're going to, experience God. And then we'll make it happen through the outer structure and protection. But Betzalel told Moshe, you're not the average guy. For me and the rest of the Jewish people, that's not going to work. We are not going to be inspired with that vision. And so what we need to do, building a Mishkan, building a sacred space, building a relationship with God, building a relationship with people around us, building a successful life, what we need to do sometimes or often is just do the right things. Start by building infrastructure. I know I need to do this. I need to do this. I don't know exactly where it's leading, but I know it's getting somewhere. I'm making progress. I'm doing good, positive things. And then once we have our infrastructure filled out, we'll have that space carved out for ourselves to bring in those vessels, to see the end result. And so he was a practical guy. He was the guy, the boots on the ground. He was living life as a regular human being, Betzalel. And Moshe was in this elevated state of being. And so when Moshe heard that from Betzalel, he says, Betzalel, he couldn't have said that, Moses. Even though God told him that way, he didn't see the world that way. He said, Betzalel, you are in the shadow of God. Now, the simple reading, it's a compliment. Shadow of God. In this reading,
also,
it's a
maybe
little...
he also knows his own weaknesses. Maybe Moshe also Moses knew his own, he's like, maybe I didn't,
Or maybe not, it's a weakness, or it's a perspective. He couldn't have...
The perspective.
He
right.
couldn't have... You couldn't be insincere. He was really... This is the Mishkan, how he saw the Mishkan.
It seems like Betzalel was somehow reminding him somewhere deep within that just because he hears things differently because of his perspective. But when Betzalel said, no, this is what was really said, then, you're right. Like then he remembrance. But this is sort of like the metaphor you're using. It's sort of like the potter, and the potter artist has a vision, but doesn't wait till the vision is fully idealized. Then you got to touch the clay. So it's always a confluence of both, and then that informs your vision. So the mundane world, in the midst of it, it informs also elevated spiritual ideals that you can have. It actually can inform that. And the thing with the study, I'm not so sure about that because I've been taking the subways in New York all my life and also played in the subways music. And when I would go and hear a cellist play, and I'm like, wow, I just had a rough day at work, or I'm getting ready to go into the penal colony, as I call it, work. And I'm like, wow, my day is set. But I can't stop and watch because I have to take care of my essentials. I have to go to work. I have to get there. But I take that with me. I might not stand there. And how many friends of mine, even fellow iron workers, when they hear music, just because they're passing by doesn't mean it's lodged in their heart, like very profound. So that study, just because people are passing by, how many people were moved the way I am, and the way that my buds.
Right. Yeah.
And now with Facebook, you see people post it. Now they'll see somebody in the subway, take a little shot. So it might seem like it might seem like people are moving, but what it is they're just putting it in their pocket.
Saving it for later.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good point.
So here's a Kabbalistic interpretation of Moshe told Bezalel in the shadow of God. He was telling him, Bezalel, you have this unique insight because you're in the shadow of God. I am in the light of God. I see a lit up world. I live with a divine light. You are in the shadow. Shadow is a space created by lack of light, right? By something blocking, by darkness. So you live in the world of darkness. You live that experience of where you have to just dig through the rubble to find the gold. You have to trial and error to get results. You have a unique perspective that I couldn't have. And he says, I'm leaving it to you to build the Mishkan. That's why I can't build the Mishkan. Because the Mishkan is a structure for the Jewish people. Not for the holy saints. Not for the Moseses. So he was telling Bezalel, you have a unique perspective. I'm giving it over to you. Which is a fascinating insight that we as regular run-of-the-mill Jews, right? We're just regular people. That's what it's about. This is where God's home is built. Not by the great tzaddikim, not by those who see the divine, who live on the mountaintops. It's by the hard-working people who are struggling through life, who are working through their challenges. By going through the struggles, if we keep at it, we'll end up with the result. The vision will be experienced, will be eventually reached. And that's the bottom line from this whole story. That we have to build for ourselves a Mishkan. We have to build a life of success, hopefully materially, life of success in our relationships, and a life of success in our service to God and making the world a home for God.
You know, it's funny, this is just kind of that's an aside, but when you go to, I go to Beth Elohim, like the synagogue on, the Garfield.
Right.
And, in there, because, and the shul that your dad is at, it's like nice, that people go in there and talk, and it's like, it's more life, it's like babies cry, people crying, and in our synagogue, it's much more quiet, and much more, and I'm like, yours is more real life. Ours is like, because, we're not here so much, we gotta be quiet.
Best behavior.
Right, best behavior, and I'm just thinking, like, in a way, that feels true. I was like, God, people just come in and out, like, it's just, just that, just kind of as you were saying, it's like, because it's what we do,
We're showing up.
You're showing up, right. And so it's like, there's a way, like, do you know what I mean by that?
I mean, each could learn from each other. There could be more decorum, and then balance it.
Right, I always feel it's like first there's just too quiet. There's just too. They're like, in a way, it's almost fake.
Make some noise.
Yeah, like be real later.
Oh, that's great.
But this lesson we can all apply somehow, somewhere in our life, where you don't have necessarily the vision, the inspiration, you don't know where it's heading. It can be in very specific things or in a bigger picture. You got to build that structure. You got to go through those motions. Get up, show up, do the right things. And that will create the structure that will develop, the vision will develop on its own, will enter, will come down. We got to just go through the motions, create that structure. And, there's in Kabbalah it says that, and this is also in life, you have this, build and they shall come. You create the vessels, and someone will flow into it.
Feel the dreams.
Create the channels,
Right.
go through it, and the dreams will filter into it. They'll find themselves.
So this was built, right? This place was built. Which is
Mishkan was built.
Where is this?
It was a portable temple. They took with them as they traveled for 40 years through the desert. Eventually, they brought it into Israel. And then in
It's not
Israel,
part of the second temple.
No.
Or something,
in Israel, they eventually built a more permanent structure in Shiloh, in Givon and Shiloh, and then they built the permanent temple in Jerusalem about 400
Was
years.
this the basis of how they all go? Like,
Well, the structure was a basic prototype of the structure of the temple, but this specific Mishkan was buried after they stopped using it. It was a portable, pack up. You put the poles in the sockets and click everything together. And once it was no longer needed, they had a permanent structure. They buried all the materials of the structure somewhere, wherever, I don't know where, somewhere in Israel.
it's probably out of wood. I mean, it was probably complicated.
Wood.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of
There's no
materials
plastic,
used.
There's no like little
wood, metal, and then materials,
They had
leathers.
metal
and-
back then. That was always They had metal. They had metal back in.
Not like the metals we use today, most of the metals, but
That
gold,
would've been
copper,
the,
silver,
It would have
Right.
been the Bronze Age. right?
bronze.
Yeah.
They didn't have weren't using steel, aluminum, and
Right.
Right.
But they had like
graphite, whatever you use.
Right.
But yeah, they had metals.
Right. So it's the thing about So it was just like they had more than we think.
They were, pretty advanced.
Yeah.
Not like technologically, like in electricity and computers, but it's only a few thousand years ago.
Right. So
Just over 3,000 years ago.
Build it and they will come.
That's a
Build
life.
the dream.
That's a master life,
That
They
was-
say
that was
90%
right
of
out
success is
Pablo
showing
Lara,
up.
That movie.
right.
Showing up.
Showing up.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful. L'chaim.
l'chaim, l'chaim.
That's beautiful.
It's nice. And so the idea,